reports. I mean, there are all types of open law and reporting requirements that they can keep that type of stuff in check. And I think there will be a freedom of transparency in voting that allows us to easily check those things, because I think the job of Congress will be different under monetary reform than it is now. Where now their job is to basically argue, the job under monetary reform is actually to get stuff done. And so I think that would make them a lot more accountable. And I made me forget what your second question was. What was it?
Yeah, sorry, we've got it.
FDIC insurance, yeah.
It was the FDIC insurance?
Yeah, well, we still need insurance.
Yeah.
I think insurance rates would be very low because the banks would not be lending money they don't have. So you would need some insurance in the sense that your checking account, they can't lend at all under our system, because if you have the right to that money, nobody else can have the right to that money. So the insurance rate should be very low, but the fraud statute should be significant, because long before there was legal fractional reserve, there was sub rosa fractional reserve. So there would have to be government auditing of banks, and there would have to be fraud protection of banks, or else they would just do it without admitting they're doing it. The first question about transparency, well, one thing is if government became much smaller, it would be easier to observe. So you do this, you can get rid of all the economic incentive programs and the housing subsidies, and if you're giving people a basic income per capita grant, you can get rid of most of welfare. That makes government smaller. There is an argument that government should distribute the new money on a per capita basis and then continue to tax, because the public itself pays more attention. I know I work with local governments. Local governments never waste the money that they get from local taxpayers, because local taxpayers hate giving them money. But if they get money from the state and federal governments, they just, well, we got this money, we got to spend it. Or we're going to do this because if we do this, we can get more government, federal money to do this. So the real pork barrel projects, even at the local level, come from other sources. And if government can just print the money and spend it, and they say, well, we got more money to print than we can spend, they're going to come up with other things to spend it on. But if they collect the money and distribute it on a per capita basis and then have to go to you, the taxpayer, to permit them to spend it, they're going to get more pushback.
Just one comment. One small aspect of that I'd just like to comment on. With regard to the transparency and the fact we have, I just was reading something really fascinating in the past 2 weeks, that because of the demise of newspapers generally, and the fact that they're now basically becoming national or international, that a lot of communities, and maybe most communities in the United States, do not have local reporters reporting on government anymore at all, and that they've perceived that the absence of scrutiny by local reporters has really opened the door, even in circumstances where the local people would be outraged if they knew what was going on, because there's nobody reporting it anymore. So it was just an aside, but I thought it was like really interesting when you talk about transparency. A lot of it's information, and a lot of it is if people only knew. I mean, it's all of this, as if people knew. I mean, that was kind of like, what is the story here?
Thank you. If I could remember both questions. The first was about FDIC insurance, I believe, and this was answered either last year or the year before, or maybe both years, by Stephen, that absolutely FDIC insurance would be continued under the NEED Act. There's no question about that we would want to continue it. Why would we want to make people think that the banks weren't safe in some way? So that would be continued under the NEED Act. It would probably be cheaper. And as far as to make sure that we had fraud protections, et cetera, against the banks, that's absolutely necessary to continue continue to scrutinize what they're doing. As far as whether our taxes are gonna go down, they'll probably go down. Whether we should do away with all taxes, I don't think that's gonna happen. And I don't really know if that's something that we could really address here, because we just don't know. There will be a need for less tax money under the NEAT Act.
It's a type of tax, the state tax or a death tax that the right wants to get rid of. Would be a macroeconomic disaster if you got rid of it. We'd create England where we'd have 4,500 families hiring 1.5 million servants to take care of them. We all watch that show on PBS, all the servants I like that. Yeah, Downton Abbey. And so a state tax, whatever it is, and it also encourages Bill Gates to set up his foundation and all those billionaires to set up, it's very high anyway, to set up these foundations. So we need a state tax. It shouldn't be too low, by the way. We want people to accumulate capital. The law's not too bad right now. So a state tax is very, very important.
So, I just want to, about the insurance, the FDIC, you know, part of it. I know that Stephen has said that, yeah, we would keep that. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the act says that we would keep it, but as to the need for it, that's the part that I don't quite understand, because we're gonna change the rules that the banks can use your money that's in your checking account to the fact that they can't use the money that's in your checking account. So it's illegal for them to use money. So do you want to have insurance against that, or do you want to have a law against that? And that's the fraud part of it. So to me, the only way they can get at the depositor's money, and that's where FDIC insures, to me, the need for it is not going to exist in the future, except perhaps thinking of it in terms of confidence and trust. You know, that some people might feel like if there's no insurance on my account, then should I trust it? But I don't see why it's necessary. I'm gonna put it that way. But the fraud part of it should be strengthened completely. I mean, I don't know if the penalties under the act are sufficient to guard against the fraud part of it. But just for that part of the depositors, now depositors' money is going to be depositors' money, and that's how it got in. They got to be real money in there, and so what? But the other part about the taxation, I think, wasn't there a second part of it about the taxation, about the government needing taxation? My view of the government's budget. Okay, so we're talking about. Okay, so the government's budget now is pretty much composed of taxation, proceeds from debt increases, and intergovernmental transfers, okay? And that's the revenue side. And so we're going to say, well, what are we going to do about the revenue side of the government's budget? Well, we're going to substitute the borrowing part, the proceeds from the debt part, with new money increases, and that covers the deficit part. The non-tax part of it is covered by the new money. But to me, once you get into more than that, and that is to say more than the new money requirement is, to me, any additional money that's created would have to be taxed back out of it, just as a matter of sound, fiscal administration or whatever you would call it. So I would think that there would be a continuing and pretty much standard, regular need for taxation under the NEAT Act. It's just my opinion.
I'd like to make a comment too on the FDIC insurance. In England, with Ben Dyson and positive money, the money that went into your demand account, your checking account, actually wouldn't stay in your bank in England, according to the Positive Money Act. It would go directly, where the banks keep their money is in their own banking system. And so your checking account would actually be stored at the Bank of England. It wouldn't be at the local bank. It would be at the Bank of England, and it wouldn't need to be insured or guaranteed. And back on the other side, where you're ready to make an investment into a savings account for purposes of making an interest, you've got to positive money's perspective, and I'm gonna agree with this, is that you've got to decide where you want to deposit your money, what are your values and where you're depositing your money, and what type of skin do you want to have in your game. You want to have lower, higher risk, but based on that risk, that's your insurance. And you may want to turn around and invest towards equity and have a different type of investment entirely, but it's putting skin into the game, and it's not having insurance backing you up. When I've talked to Zarlenga about insurance, and we can have this discussion, he talked about the need for insurance of a bank being robbed, basically. And what type of insurance was that? He didn't make it, and he didn't want to get in a big argument over it, basically, with other people who really were pushing for security reasons or wanted a blanket to hold on to, so, okay.
I just had a quick comment on that too. Janie, do you remember, it seems to me that when the act was coming together, that discussion, we had a brief discussion about that, and the decision was to keep the deposit insurance to maintain confidence. And the fact is that it probably wouldn't be very expensive, because even under the existing system, the FDIC sets the rate based on its experience rates. So if it worked the way we all think it's going to, it really, the system would be in effect, but the rates would be like minimal to non-existent. Isn't that how, I think, something like that. It's vague, it's been a while.
But I would add to that, it seems to me the incentives are wrong, because essentially, if the bankers are essentially insured by the federal government, what the hell do they care if they make bad investments? So I'm not sure there ought to be insurance for that.
Well, under the NEED Act, excuse me, I believe under the NEED Act, you could put money in different types of accounts. If you put in a safekeeping account, the bank has to keep it safe for you. They can't invest it for you. If you decide to, in some way or other, go into a joint investment, mortgage loans or something or other with the bank, then you agree on whatever terms.
But that's the account I'm talking about. I'm not talking about.
Okay, you're not, but we would have the option to put in our money into a safekeeping account where the bank couldn't touch it. Now, we would also have our option to make an investment with the bank, which would be mortgage loans or something or other like that, which, again, that should be in some way regulated. I'm not saying that if the loan goes under that we wouldn't suffer the consequences, but if in fact the bank was doing some sort of manipulation.
So let's go back to the real world here, guys. You put money at no interest, and Positive Money has some excellent comments on what to do with it. You put no money at no interest, it's a guaranteed, I'll put it in writing, guaranteed loss, that you will lose purchasing power because of taxes, under the current tax law, but because of inflation. Because you're gonna have at least one or two. You're losing 1 or 2 or 3 or 4% a year, even if we keep inflation. If we happen to misjudge the NEED Act a little bit and goes up to 5 or 6, you lose 6% a year. So any money that you put in a bank or any investment at no rate of return is a guaranteed loss. Don't confuse nominal but real purchasing power. Give Sir Joe.
I have a question specifically for John. I know you've been in communication now for several years with people within the banking system, bankers, and from your experience, I'd like you to share what materials have you found most effective to explain to them that their conception of how money works is not quite the way it does work, you know. What have been the best angles and the best resources?
Sergio, my experience is very limited, but the particular CEO of the bank where I bank in Athens, Ohio, is the guy that I've been talking to primarily, and I don't think he was able to come around to see that he really doesn't create money when he makes loans until I was able to show him the figure that I showed you today with the 4 loans sequentially increasing the money supply. He looked at that and then he realized there was no way to counter that. And I think, I didn't force a confession out of him that, oh, now I believe, that's not a polite thing to do, but I really think having showed him the mechanism in front of him, where he just couldn't get out of it, that made an impact. But also, I've just shared some of the materials that I've used in monetary literacy group, not with bankers, but with economists, and some have responded very positively, others not. It just depends. I communicated for a while, but the communication had ceased with another banker in Denver, whom I met, and he was at least again willing to have a conversation, but I've had a hard time because I don't go to Denver very much, so that hasn't continued. But with a local banker, it's been a satisfactory interchange. I've learned some things from him about the limitations that bankers face and so on, and I think he's slowly learning some things from me, and he thanks me for the conversations, and I thank him in return. So that's about all I can say. My experience is very limited, so.
Yeah, I go to a local bank in Chicago for the last 11 years, picking up their condition of statement. And I don't go in there to argue with them, but I just keep politely opening the door with the conversation. I may leave a little material, and I find that they really don't understand the macroeconomics of banking. And so, you know, from their perspective, it all looks like new deposits, the money multiplier, if that's how they're thinking. And so to get that big picture, it takes a different approach.
I have an announcement just to get people to get here early after, well, tomorrow morning, to get here a little early. I got a really good song parody that I'm gonna do like 5 minutes before everything begins. So if you get here 5 minutes, it's totally not essential to understanding monetary theory, but you'll like it. And it's always good to have something that's fun and non-essential before an event, so that people won't come in late, because people will show up for the fun stuff more than they'll show up for the essential stuff. So get here 5 minutes early tomorrow.
I have an announcement. We're going to end today with a skit. And it's another skit with audience participation. The skit is about the skit takes place in, I think it's an 8th grade history class. So you are the class, okay? And we have the teacher, Mr. Swank. Mr. Swank, get up here and control your class. And we have a couple of students here, in addition to the class. We have Ernest. Ernest, raise your hand. Ben! And we have his friend Arnold. Arnold, raise your hand. There you go. You might want to share.
Arnold or Arnetta?
Arnetta. Arnetta. Arnetta.
I'm
trans, you know.
Bringing us along.
And as the class, at a certain point when I raise this, you help out your fellow students.
Okay, Arnold, come up and tell the class what you learned about the American Revolution and its cause.
The colonists did not like being taxed by the English Parliament, and so they revolted.
Yes, Ernest, you have a thought?
Yes, Mr. Swank.
Okay, Ernest, can you share your thought with our class?
Yes. Mr. Yes.
Yes. Oh. Sorry, okay. Yeah. Okay. Arnold, thank you for your help. You may take your seat now.
That's me.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Well, Mr. Swank, I was in the library the other day,
Yes, good boy.
and I found a book with the words of Mr. Benjamin Franklin in it.
Why, Ernest, that's wonderful. We have talked a lot about Benjamin Franklin and what a great man he was for our country.
Yes, well, Mr. Franklin said the cause of the American Revolutionary War was the English Parliament passing laws so that the 13 colonies couldn't create their own money anymore.
Well, Ernest, it seems to me one doesn't just create money, so the Parliament was within its rights. I'm not sure what Benjamin Franklin was talking about. But we all know, right, Arnold, that taxing the colonists did make them angry.
But Mr. Swank, this book by Benjamin Franklin really made sense to me. You see, the colonies didn't have much money to begin with. There was little gold or silver coins, a few of them, and that's what they used back then.
Yes, the king coined the gold and silver in his mint. We read about that.
So what were the colonists to do? They couldn't buy food, pay rent, pay working people without money. My dad is always complaining today that we don't have enough money, so we can't buy things we kids need. Someone's got to make the money so we can all earn it and have it.
Well, Ernest, of course, someone makes the money. It comes from our Federal Reserve.
But Mr. Swank, back then there was no Federal Reserve.
Right.
And there was very little gold money or silver coins. Mr. Franklin said many of the coins were returned to England to pay for taxes and tools.
Well, Ernest, I'm not sure how important all of Mr. Franklin's thoughts are. Money is just always there.
But that's the thing, Mr. Swank, the money wasn't there. So what could the farmers and craftsmen and merchants do? Mr. Franklin said there was lots of unemployment and even hunger.
Well, I'm not sure about all of this, Ernest.
But Mr. Swank, I read it too. It's true. Mr. Franklin wouldn't lie.
Yes, Ben Franklin said the legislature in each colony decided to create pieces of paper called scrip and use it to pay for government expenses. And the government would build a bridge or a market for the farmers or something else.
Well, this is quite some imagination you boys have. I'm sure Ben Franklin knew a lot, but what does this have to do with the cause of the American Revolution?
Everything, Mr. Swank.
Okay. Hold it in, class. You must wait to be recognized. Not everyone at the same time.
Yes, Mr. Swank. What Ben Franklin said was that the colony's money went to pay rent, buy food, make crafts, pay workers, and the colonies were very, very prosperous. He said there wasn't any poverty.
Yes, but Ernest, what does this have to do with the cause of the American Revolution?
Because Parliament passed laws and told the colonies they couldn't have their money, and the colonists were really, really angry. Without scrip money, they were poor and unemployed. According to Ben Franklin, this was the real cause of the American Revolution.
And maybe we could get rid of poverty today.
Don't be ridiculous, Arnold. We have our own money today.
No, we don't, Mr. Swank. Here's a book I found in the library. It revealed, did you know, that the Federal Reserve was private. It's controlled by the private banks.
Now, Arnold, I want you to sit down. That's enough.
Did you know that these private banks create bank money whenever they make us a loan?
They don't do a smidgen of work, but get to create money and earn interest.
Arnold, Ernest, this is absolutely enough.
But Mr. Swank, just like Mr. Franklin said, our government could make its own money without debt.
Our government can get rid of poverty. A very brave Mr. Dennis Kucinich tried to educate the American people with the NEED Act, H.R. 2990.
NEED Act?
Yes, the Deed Act. This act takes the power to create money away from the private banks and gives it back to the government, just like the Constitution says, to create public money and millions of jobs and more.
Well, quite an imagination Ben Franklin and Dennis Kucinich had. Now, you're supposed to make these people make noises at this point.
Oh.
No, class. Oh, that's the end.
Turn to,
What's that?
Turn to page 47.
Turn to page 47. What's on page 47?
That's their
the
textbook.
next assignment.
That's a textbook, oh, okay, that's what that is. Okay.
Thank you.
I think we needed a little